Limit is y goes to 0 of 4y squared cosine of 3y divided by tangent squared of 4y. The first thing we're going to do is try plugging a 0 in for each of the y's. That'll give us 4 times 0 squared times the cosine of 3 times 0 divided by the tangent of 4 times 0, and then square that. That's what it means to be tan squared. You take the tangent first and then you square the result. 4 times 0 squared is a 0. 3 times 0 is a 0. And in the denominator, 4 times 0 is a 0. In the numerator, 4 times 0 gives us 0. Cosine of 0 is a 1. In the denominator, tangent of 0 is the sine of 0 over the cosine of 0. Sine of 0 is 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. 0 over 1 is 0. We get 0 squared. 0 times 1 is a 0. 0 squared is a 0. We have the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. Since this is resulting from trig functions of different phases and power functions, we can make use of the identity limit as theta goes to 0 of theta over the sine of theta equals to 1. In order to make use of that identity, we have to rewrite the non-sine cosine functions into sines and cosines. That would be the tangent of 4y. We're going to rewrite it as sine over cosine of 4y. It's being squared, so when we rewrite it, we'll write it as sine of 4y over cosine of 4y, and then quantity squared, like so. Now, since we have a fraction in the denominator, our next step is to reciprocate that fraction in the denominator and multiply it with the numerator. So that'll be limit as y goes to 0 of 4y squared cosine of 3y multiplied with the reciprocal, which is going to be cosine of 4y over sine of 4y quantity squared. We can put the original expression over 1 to also make it a fraction. So now we can multiply these fractions, and we have limit as y goes to 0 of, in the numerator we would have 4y squared cosine 3y cosine squared of 4y divided by 1 times sine squared of 4y. I'm squaring the cosine and sine because of the square in the fraction. Our next step will be to isolate any sine functions. There's 2 of them. They actually have the same phase of 4y. They're in the denominator, so we will isolate those into their own fraction. So I'm going to have a sine of 4y squared. Now to square it, I'm going to put it in a fraction and put it squaring the entire fraction. That just helps with figuring out the phase matching and the compensating for the phase matching method to be able to generate the identity. All remaining terms can go into their own fraction. That will include the 4y squared, the cosine of 3y, and the cosine squared of 4y. We just need to isolate the signs. These are all in the numerator. Now we need to phase match. We have a sine phase of 4y in the denominator. We need a phase match with a 4y in the other position, which is the numerator. We're going to put a 4y in there. And then to compensate, I will put a 4y, which is being squared, in the denominator of the other fraction. Be sure to square it to compensate it fully. And that will give us limit as y goes to 0 of 4y divided by the sine of 4y quantity squared times 4y squared cosine of 3y cosine squared of 4y. And now I'm going to square out the 4y that's in the denominator. It's the only thing I'm doing in this step. And that gives me 16y y squared. We can cancel the y squared from the numerator with the y squared in the denominator. They're multiplying everything else, so they can cancel. And then the 4 and the 16 to a 4 in the denominator. Let's rewrite what we have. I'm not doing anything with that first expression at all because that's perfect form for the identity. It's been phase matched. And we have left a cosine of 3y, a cosine squared of 4y, and all of that over a 4. The first fraction is phase match perfect identity, theta over sine theta. That will come to a 1. It's being squared, but 1 squared is still a 1. So we have 1 squared. Now we've removed the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. We should be able to plug a 0 in for the remaining y's, and we will have a cosine of 3 times 0, a cosine of 4 times 0 squared, and then all of that divided by a 4. The 1 squared is 1, and 1 times anything is the same thing, so we don't need to write that 1 squared any longer. 3 times 0 is 0. 4 times 0 is also 0. And the cosine of 0 is a 1, so we end up with 1 times 1 squared divided by 4. 1 squared is 1 times 1 is 1 over 4.